Walk into any gun shop in America, stand in front of the ammunition wall, and count the bullet weights. Under 30-06, 110 grain, 125, 150, 165, 180, 200, 220. Under 270, 130, 140, 150. That is the whole list, and it has been the whole list since Calvin Coolidge was president. Now the part that should stop a man cold. Those two cartridges are the same cartridge. Same case, same rifle action. In 1925, Winchester took the 30-06, squeezed the neck down to hold a skinnier bullet, and stopped there. One fires a bullet 277 thousandths of an inch across. The other, 308 thousandths, 31 thousandths apart. About 8 sheets of notebook paper. That is the entire physical difference between them. And American hunters have been fighting about it for 100 years. It gets handed from father to son like a family Bible, and almost nobody carrying it can tell you where it started. It did not start in a ballistics lab. It started with two men who wrote for a living. Jack O'Connor was a college English professor who became shooting editor of Outdoor Life and held that chair for 31 years. He hunted sheep in high country and wrote about it beautifully, which is rarer than good shooting. He carried a .270 and spent 4 decades telling millions of readers it was the finest big game cartridge a man could own. Elmer Keith was a working cowboy from Idaho who believed a bullet ought to be heavy enough to break bone and keep going. He thought the .270 was a wispy little thing barely fit for coyotes, and said so, loudly, in print, for just as long. Two writers, opposite tastes, calling each other wrong in public for 40 years. Pick up almost any opinion a hunter holds about these two rounds today, and it traces back to one of those men. Not to data, to a personality. So take both of them seriously, and find what was true, what was wrong, and what was true for a reason neither of them understood. Start with the origin, because it explains the whole fight. Winchester necked down the case that had armed America in the First World War, loaded it with a 130-grain bullet at roughly 3,100 feet per second, and produced a round that shot flatter than nearly anything on the continent that hit as hard. And it sat there, ignored. The 30-06 was everywhere, every returning soldier knew it, and the government was practically giving away war surplus ammunition for pennies. The new cartridge had a better trajectory and almost no audience. What saved it was not engineering. It was a byline. O'Connor got one of the early rifles chambered for it, loved it, and said so for 40 years, in the most widely read hunting magazine in America. So the .270 did not earn its fame by being measurably better. It earned its fame because the most trusted gun writer in the country fell in love with it. The reputation came from a man, not a chronograph. And a reputation built by a writer can be audited like any other piece of writing. In 1955, O'Connor wrote his most famous column on exactly this question. Is the .270 better than the 30-06? His answer, mostly, was yes. He built that yes on 3 pillars: flatter trajectory, more shocking power at long range, better accuracy. For 70 years, hunters have quoted those 3 like scripture. 2 of them have not survived. Start with shocking power, because it built the most false confidence. The idea is that a fast bullet delivers some invisible hammer blow beyond the hole it makes. O'Connor used that language. So did most of the industry. But the men who spent careers cutting open the wounds found otherwise. The wound ballistics work out of the United States Army Laboratory after Vietnam, associated most publicly with Dr. Martin Fackler, took that idea apart. A bullet kills by crushing tissue, tearing vessels, and letting blood out. There is no magic thump traveling ahead of it. The accuracy pillar does not hold either. Those were groups fired from one rifle, on one afternoon, with the ammunition of that era. Every serious shooter knows a single range session tells you almost nothing. So of 3 pillars, exactly one survives: the flat trajectory. O'Connor was a superb hunter working with the best knowledge available to him, and some of it has since been overturned by the very people who revere him. That is not an insult. That is how knowledge works. His own numbers had the 130-grain .270, leaving the muzzle around 3,160 feet per second, with the comparable 30-06 load about 160 feet per second slower. That gap is real, and it widens downrange. But here is where most of the internet stops, and here is where it gets useful. Flatness does not matter as a number. It matters as forgiveness. The real question is how badly a man can misjudge the range before he misses the lungs. There is a term for that every hunter should know: maximum point-blank range. Zero the rifle so the bullet never rises more than about 3 inches above the line of sight and never falls more than 3 below. Inside that window, hold dead center on the chest and hit the vitals without thinking. For a typical 130 grain 270, that window runs out to roughly 300 yards. For a 180 grain 30-06, it closes 25 to 30 yards sooner. That is the honest size of the 270's famous advantage, not a different universe. About 1 truck length of extra forgiveness. Then there is the direction O'Connor had no tools to measure. At hunting distance, drop is not what kills a shot. Drop is predictable. Wind is not, and in wind, the 270's edge narrows or disappears depending entirely on which bullet is loaded. A sleek 165 grain 30 caliber bullet holds a crosswind about as well as a blunt 130 grain 270 bullet, sometimes better. Which means the flat shooting reputation, the one surviving pillar, is a bullet property masquerading as a cartridge property. Hold on to that sentence. It comes back and settles this entire war. Now recoil, and this one genuinely belongs to the 270. A 30-06 in a normal hunting rifle pushes back around 21 to 25 foot-pounds. A 270 comes back around 18 to 20, roughly a fifth softer. And it matters more than the number looks, for reasons that have nothing to do with ballistics and everything to do with the nervous system. A hard-kicking rifle teaches the body to anticipate. The shoulder braces, the eyes close a fraction early, the finger snatches instead of presses. That flinch pulls more shots off animals every season than wind and range error combined. But here is the correction almost nobody makes. Recoil is not a property of the cartridge. It is a property of the rifle. Felt recoil depends on what the rifle weighs, how fast it comes back, and how the stock meets the shoulder. 2 of those 3 have nothing to do with what is stamped on the barrel. A 6.5-pound ultralight mountain rifle in 270 will beat a man up harder than an 8.5-pound walnut stocked 30-06 from 1962. Same shooter, same day. The recoil advantage is real, but it belongs to the cartridge only when the rifles weigh the same. Now the thing that actually decides this fight, the thing Elmer Keith was right about all along: heavy bullets. The 270 tops out in the real world around 150 grains. The 30-06 will push 180, 200, even 220 grain bullets that drive through shoulder bone and heavy muscle and keep going. On a whitetail, none of that matters. The 2 rounds are dead equal, and anybody who says otherwise is selling a tribe. But when the animal gets big, an elk, a moose, a big bear, that extra weight is the entire game. This is the ground Keith planted his flag on, and he was right to plant it there. Now the question nobody asks: why does the 270 stop at 150 grains? Almost every explanation says it is because the bore is skinny. That answer is wrong, and the right answer is the most interesting fact in this argument. The ceiling was never in the bullet. It was cut into the rifling. A bullet is stabilized by spin, and the spin required is governed by the bullet's length, not its weight. Don Miller published the modern formulation of that in Precision Shooting in 2005. Longer bullet, faster twist. And heavy bullets in a narrow bore are necessarily long. Make a 170 grain bullet 277 thousandths across, and it comes out like a pencil. The 270 was standardized with a rifling twist of 1 turn in 10 inches. In 1925, that was sound engineering for the bullets that existed. It stabilizes 130 to 150 grain bullets beautifully, and it cannot stabilize the long ones. Winchester kept that same twist for 96 years. Philip Massaro, writing in the National Rifle Association's own American Hunter, put it plainly. That 1 in 10 twist precluded the use of most bullets heavier than 150 grains. Precluded, not the diameter, the rifling. And in 2021, Winchester proved it themselves. They released a cartridge called the 6.8 Western. Same 277 thousandths bullet diameter as the 270. Identical bore. The difference was the barrel. They scrapped the 1 in 10 twist and specified 1 turn in 8 inches, with Browning going to 1 in 7.5. The moment they did, the ceiling vanished. Factory loads at 165 grains, 170, 175, with a trajectory comparable to a 300 Magnum out past 500 yards. Sierra had to build the 175 grain bullet from scratch for Winchester, because in 96 years of American manufacturing, nobody had ever made one. Sit with what that means, because it cuts directly in Keith's favor. To make that bore play the heavy bullet game, the industry had to design a new cartridge, a new barrel, and a new bullet. 3 separate things. The 30-06 has been doing it since 1906, with no modifications whatsoever. A man can buy 220 grain ammunition off a shelf today for a rifle built during the Truman administration. Keith never had the vocabulary to explain why he was right. He watched what heavy bullets did to big animals and trusted his eyes. It took until 2021 for the industry to admit, in the form of a product launch, that the old cowboy had been reading it correctly the whole time. In fairness to the other side, that advantage is smaller than its loudest defenders think. Take a heavy 200 grain 30-06 load against a good 150 grain 270 load. At the muzzle, the 30-06 has a real edge. Run both to 500 yards and that gap shrinks to around 130 foot-pounds, roughly the entire muzzle energy of a .22 long rifle. The farther the bullet flies, the more of that lead evaporates. And there is a technical piece that cuts hard for the 270. Sectional density. How much bullet weight is stacked behind the bullet's own diameter, which is a large part of how deep a projectile drives. Because the 270's bullet is narrow, a 150 grain 270 bullet is long and pencil-like, and its sectional density lands right around .279. A 180 grain 30 caliber bullet, the classic elk load, comes in around .271. Read that again. The 150 grain 270 bullet carries slightly higher sectional density than the 180 grain 30-06 bullet, while weighing 30 grains less. That is the mathematical core of why the 270 kills far above its weight class, and why every man who has taken elk with one is telling the truth when he says so. The 30-06 only pulls decisively ahead at the very top. 220 grains gets it to about .331, and there is nothing the 270 Winchester can do to answer that, because of the rifling. But sectional density is a number on paper, and paper does not stop a bull elk. Which brings us to the thing both men were circling without ever naming. In the fall of 1946, a trucking company owner from Ashland, Oregon, named John Nosler, was hunting moose in British Columbia. He carried a Winchester Model 70 in .300 Holland and Holland Magnum. More cartridge than either of the two we are discussing. The bull was caked in dried mud from a wallow, standing in thick willows, and Nosler had to get uncomfortably close to find a window through the brush. He was an excellent marksman, with competitive awards at home, and he placed his shots where they belonged. It took 7 bullets to put that moose down. Field dressing the animal, he recovered what was left of them. The soft, jacketed bullets of that era had come apart on impact, dumping everything in the near side of an animal that needed them to reach the far side. Nosler drove home to Oregon, determined to design a better bullet. His answer was a copper wall between 2 lead cores, so the front half could expand while the rear half kept driving. He called it the partition. The next season he went back to British Columbia, and he and his partner each took a moose with 1 shot. Now put that story next to the argument. 1946 is the exact middle of the O'Connor and Keith War. Both men were arguing about caliber during the last era in which American bullets could not be trusted. Keith's entire philosophy, use enough lead to break bone and keep going, was the only rational answer available to a man in 1940. If bullets come apart, mass is your only insurance. He was not wrong. He was solving a bullet problem with the only tool anybody had. Nosler solved that same problem with engineering instead of weight. Then Barnes, Swift, and a dozen others followed, which means the war continued for another 70 years after the thing causing it had already been fixed. Here is where the practical advice lives, and it is worth more than any chart. A 270 loaded with a cheap cup and core bullet built to open fast on deer can come apart on the shoulder of an elk and fail to reach the lungs. That is where the 270's bad reputation on big game was born, and it was earned honestly. Load that same 270 with a bonded or partition-controlled expansion bullet, and it will punch both lungs on a bull elk at honest range every time it is asked to. Hunters prove it every season. The heavy bullet advantage the 30-06 holds is real. A modern premium bullet in the 270 closes most of it, because a projectile that holds together and drives straight matters more than 31 thousandths of an inch of diameter. Get the bullet right, and the 270 is enough gun for very nearly anything on this continent. Get it wrong, and the 30-06 will fail a man just as thoroughly. The choice that matters most is not printed on the barrel. It is printed on the box. Now feeding the rifle, because for most men, this decides more than ballistics ever will. The 30-06 is on every shelf in America, and always has been. A gun shop, a farm store, a hardware counter in a town of 400 people. When panic buying stripped the racks bare, a box of 30-06 was usually still sitting there after the fashionable stuff had vanished. But why? That question explains the shelf we started in front of. The 30 caliber diameter served the United States military for roughly half a century, then continued as the NATO standard in a shorter case. 50 years of government contracts. Decades of surplus. Match shooting built on top of it. Every bullet maker in America built tooling and research budgets around that diameter, because that is where the money was. The 270's bullet had none of it. No military parent, no match discipline, no surplus. For 90-plus years, it survived on hunting demand alone. That is the real reason the shelf looks the way it does. Not physics, procurement. And it is why O'Connor's rivals were half right for the wrong reason when they said the 270 could not shoot as well. There has never been a common match grade 270 bullet, and it was never because the cartridge lacked the ability. It was because no institution ever paid anyone to find out, which makes what is happening now strange to watch. In 2022, the United States Army selected a new service cartridge, a 6.8 millimeter round. 6.8 millimeters is 277 thousandths of an inch. The same diameter Winchester picked in 1925, for reasons nobody at the time could defend. As of 2026, with the rifle program shifting from the M7 to the shorter XM8, that cartridge has been retained. For the first time in a century, the 270's bullet diameter has an army behind it. Exactly the thing that built the 30-06's shelf. That does not put a heavier bullet in anyone's rifle tonight. The 1 in 10 twist is still cut into that barrel, and it is not changing. But the men buying deer rifles 10 years from now may be looking at a very different ammunition wall than the one we counted at the start. So here is the verdict, and it comes in 3 layers, because a single winner would be a lie. Layer 1. The animal and the country. For deer, antelope, and mountain game in open terrain, where the shot may stretch and the animal will not weigh half a ton, the 270 is the better tool. O'Connor was right, for the reasons that survived. It shoots flatter where flat matters. It kicks less, so most men shoot it better. And its narrow, high sectional density bullet drives deeper than its weight suggests. For elk, moose, big bear, or for the man who wants one rifle that will do everything from a whitetail to the largest animal on the continent, the 30-06 is the better tool. Keith was right, and the industry confirmed it in 2021 by building an entire new cartridge just to let the smaller bore do what the 30-06 has always done. Layer 2. The rifle itself. A featherweight 270 is not a soft shooting rifle. Weight and stock fit move felt recoil further than caliber does. Pick up both, in the actual weights offered, before deciding which kicks less. Layer 3, and it outranks the other 2. The bullet decides more than the cartridge does. A 270 with a premium-controlled expansion bullet outperforms a 30-06 loaded with something cheap, on any animal, every time. John Nosler figured that out in 1946, and the argument has spent 80 years catching up to him. And this is the honest heart of it. These 2 cartridges are 90% identical, separated by 31 thousandths of an inch and a few hundred foot-pounds that mostly evaporate before the bullet arrives. The war between them was never a war between two cartridges. It was a war between two men who saw hunting differently. O'Connor with his flat-shooting elegance, Keith with his big-bore honesty. Both right about different animals at different distances, and both arguing in an era when the bullet in the box could not be trusted. Nobody inherited a ballistics fact. They inherited a personality clash between two writers who have been dead for decades. So talk. This is the comment section that argument was built for. What is in the safe, and what does it hunt? And the one this channel wants most, from the men who have carried both for 30 years. Straight answer. Did the difference ever show up on an animal, or did it show up in the recoil and the reputation? Then the harder one. If Winchester released a .270 tomorrow with a 1-8 twist barrel and a factory 170 grain load, would the 30-06 still have a reason to exist? Or has this whole argument been about a barrel specification from 1925 that nobody ever bothered to revisit? Somebody watching is about to buy the deer rifle they will carry for the next 30 years. The man who has hunted with both is worth more to them than any chart. Go back to that ammunition wall. Stand there again and count the tags. That shelf was not built by physics. It was built by a war contract, a magazine column, a rifling decision made in 1925, and one stubborn mud-caked moose in British Columbia that refused to fall down. None of it was a verdict on which cartridge kills better. All of it was history, hardening into something men mistook for truth. I have watched grown men who would give each other the last of their water argue about 31 thousandths of an inch until neither would look the other in the eye. It is the smallest thing hunters fight over, and the loudest, and it has always struck me as a strange way to spend the years we get. If you would rather judge a cartridge by what it does on game than by which gun writer your father swore by, you are already among your own people here. Subscribe. This is where the hunters who check the story before they trust it come to sit.